Mark Carney, Trudeau's money man, globalist, China's pal. Weeks in, he jets to Beijing, scores a $250 million loan from their state bank. 11 MPs tied to Beijing. Carney's crew says nothing, selling us out. Foreign cash, secret deals. Carney's Canada.
Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. So as we know, we are underway in a federal election. I believe this is going to be the most important election of my lifetime, the most consequential election of my lifetime. And we hear that a lot during elections. This time it is actually true. Our country is in serious trouble. And if Canadians choose to double down on this Liberal government, do a fourth term of Liberal government, I don't know what will happen to the country. I don't know what will happen with Canada, but I fear the worst. I fear that our country cannot survive. And so here we are in this election. And we learn this absolute bombshell news that our election is being interfered by the communist Chinese government. Again, for years, we've been warned that there is interference in our democratic institutions, specifically in our elections. We learned that it happened in 2021, sort of more on a minor scale, but there were instances of Chinese groups communicating and trying to dissuade voters from voting for the Conservatives. It's happening again. The government's come out and said it, that it's happening. We know it's happening. And the response is just sort of a collective, like shrugging our shoulders, not much we can do about it. Let's just carry on. That is not acceptable, folks. This is our democracy that we are fighting for. This is our election, and this needs to stop. So today on the show, we are going to shine a light on this nefarious activity. I am joined by one of the best investigative journalists in the country who has been painstakingly outlining this and providing evidence and showcasing it to his followers and his readers. I'm talking about Sam Cooper. Sam, thank you so much for joining the program today.
Glad to be here with you. And I agree, Candice, this is the most important election we can imagine, certainly that I've ever experienced.
Well, and the fact, I mean, this is just so frustrating to me. Like, we had a site intelligence officer come out this week and say what we all know to be true, that there are coordinated campaigns promoting Mark Carney. I covered this on the show. This was just so frustrating. The legacy media covered it in the exact opposite way, right? We know that the Chinese government is out there promoting Mark Carney, pushing his message, saying that he's the best leader, trying to convince specifically people in the Chinese diaspora community, but also more broadly in other communities, saying, we need to vote for Mark Carney. He's the one that will stand up to Donald Trump. And how do the media cover it? The media say that Mark Carney is being targeted, that the Liberals are being targeted as if they are somehow the victims of this coordinated campaign. We all know that if this was happening with the Conservatives, say the Americans or the Russians were out there promoting Pierre Poilievre, we know that this would be a huge scandal. The media would be tearing their hair out. It would be, the #1 story across the country. Everyone would be talking about how unacceptable it is that there were foreign interference. And yet somehow when it happens with China, when it happens with the Liberals, again, there's just this sort of collective shrug of the shoulders. And Sam, I want to get you to react to this video. So Mark Carney was out in Delta, British Columbia on Tuesday. He was asked about this. And the thing that I want to point out that stood out to me is that he refuses to condemn it. He refuses to condemn China. He's asked to comment about it. He said he has absolutely no idea why China is trying to help him and trying to get him promoted. And then he just stops short. He says, I'll leave it at that. Why would you leave it at that? Why wouldn't you say this is completely unacceptable and I don't want the Chinese government out there helping me? But Carney couldn't bring himself to do that. Instead, he just sort of bumbles and says that he has no idea and he's not really a part of it. This is so weak to me. Okay, let's play this clip and then I'll get you to respond to it.
From my understanding, some of the campaign was pushing positive narratives about you. Why do you think that China, the PRC, seems to like you? Why are they praising you?
I have absolutely no idea, and I have absolutely no idea, and I think I'll leave it at that.
I'll just leave it at that. Why would he just leave it at that? Why wouldn't he say this is unacceptable in Canadian democracy and it needs to stop? I mean, to me, that was just so unacceptable of an answer. What do you make of all this, Sam?
Candice, it was one of the weakest answers, frankly, I've ever seen from a national leader. One, I was at that press conference that disclosed that site Breaking News Intelligence, which, as you know, the only reason journalists are now getting that is because my work over the previous years put the spotlight on Canada's lack of action on these known threats. So Mr. Carney's answer, look, we as journalists in that site briefing on Monday, we were told by the government that Mr. Carney was targeted by PRC, rather Communist Party networks with connections to the highest level of the state, promoting or boosting through WeChat some positive and some negative messages. But a very astute National Post reporter looked at the briefing package we got and said, I'm sorry, I only see very strong positive messages. And I also read those WeChat posts. And what do you know? They were saying, they were very glowing, a 2,000-word story saying essentially the same thing the Liberals are saying in their campaign. But let me break it down. The communists were saying Mark Carney will be a strong champion against Donald Trump. The American government wants to make Canada the 51st state. They want to take Canada's resources. Mr. Carney is a rock star economist. And so myself, as probably the leading subject expert in Canadian journalism and a lot of the areas of government on Chinese interference, I can dissect that Chinese intelligence and indicate that, yes, not only is it focused on the millions of Chinese Canadians, millions of page views, but that same narrative is going across the Liberal Party campaign. And with my deep knowledge of how Chinese intelligence has access to Justin Trudeau's inner circle through staff positions, I think it's fair to ask, has that Chinese Communist Party messaging that at the end of the day seeks to divide Ottawa from Washington and has been trying to do that since Pierre Trudeau quite successfully with a lot of people in the Liberal Party, making Canadians anti-American in their view, is that communist messaging that supports Mr. Carney making it into the Liberal campaign? And my short answer is yes, I believe so. I can see a lot of data points lining that up. But look, Mr. Carney's answer, he could have said there were messages that said that the Liberals will be essentially, the best to fight the United States. That's not acceptable. Canada will always be the ally of the United States. We can never be separated. If I were a Canadian leader, if I ever go into politics, that would be my message. But Mr. Carney, Candice, I've reported in the weeks prior, Mr. Carney meets with Xi Jinping in 2024. Mr. Carney secures a $250 million Bank of China loan for his investment fund Brookfield, while China's real estate market is crashing. So at a high level, I think Mr. Carney is very, very positive for Beijing in its growing economic war, if not threat of greater and broader war with the United States. That's why they're supporting Carney. And I guess he can't say it. He would not be smart to say that.
Well, you would like to at least him condemn the idea that a foreign government is interfering in our election. It's despicable that he wouldn't. This clip was making the rounds on social media. Andrew shared it a few weeks ago, but it was popping up everywhere as well. So this is at a conference, China Carbon Neutrality, where Mark Carney basically just praises China, says that China is at center stage in the new global sustainable financial system, and really just cheerleading China. So it's no wonder why China would be out there supporting Mark Carney. Let's play that clip.
The momentum behind this agenda is now tremendous, and it'll be important that China is center stage to shape this new global sustainable financial system.
And we see a lot of these kind of clips circulating of Mark Carney. Here is another one. This one was from all the way back in August 2016. But here's Mark Carney speaking at a Toronto Region Board of Trade, praising China, saying that they're ambitious and basically saying that their greatest strength is their perspective. Let's play that clip.
One of the many strengths of China is their perspective, their medium long-term perspective. This is an ambitious G20. It's an ambitious Chinese leadership.
So we see that Mark Carney has a history and a career of wanting to promote China, wanting to work with China. You mentioned that he took that state loan from the state government bank in China for $250 million back when he was also advising Justin Trudeau. Well, here's something interesting. This is a graphic from Fox News. It was posted on X by Kirk Lubomov. And he writes this. He says, here is how countries have been responding to Donald Trump's tariffs. And then he writes, oh, Canada and the company we keep. So here is the breakdown. Trump's tariff response, the countries that are trying to negotiate with the Americans. And you can see the flags of those countries. So we have, let's see, Japan, South Korea, the UK, Switzerland, Malaysia, Singapore, Brazil, Colombia, Turkey, and Australia. Countries that have offered concessions, India, Israel, and a handful of others. And then the countries that have retaliated, there are only two. We are in a league unto ourselves along with the Chinese. Canada and China are the two countries that are actually wanting to go to war against the Americans. Countries that want may possibly retaliate, haven't decided yet. That would be the European Union, pardon me. And then the country that is having no retaliation whatsoever is Mexico. So when you look at Mark Carney praising China, and then when you look at his leadership and what Canada is doing, it looks like we are aligning ourselves away from the United States and along with China. I'm sorry, China is not the company that we should be keeping on the international stage. No wonder China is promoting the Liberal government and Mark Carney, because they see Canada as an easy mark, an ally in their war, in their Cold War against the United States. It's unbelievable that this is where we are as a country under the Liberal leadership. What do you make of all this, Sam?
I agree with everything you said. And Candice, I can give insight into records that neither the Globe and Mail, CBC, or anyone else in Canada had access to. So people can go to the Bureau and see that I reported on CSIS documents that I obtained through leaks because people judged it so important. In 2019, the documents say, during the Mun Wanzhou case, these documents say that People's Republic of China intelligence employed a massively sophisticated operation targeting Canada's election, and they calibrated their support. This is key. The document says they favor the Liberal Party leader, Justin Trudeau, and the Liberals, but they calibrated their support among other parties, and it was to secure the release of Mun Wanzhou. So think about what happened. Mun Wanzhou indeed was released back to China. China, as we know from my reporting and the Globe and Mail, indeed interfered pretty deeply. I say very deeply in 2019 and 21. The Hague Commission says not so deeply. I say the Hague Commission is just repeating the same narrative that we heard in that press conference on Monday. That is, China is agnostic in targeting Canadian politicians. Sure, they're agnostic and very sophisticated, but the Liberals are favored. Mark Carney is favored, as we just learned. I have just told you, my documents say that Justin Trudeau was favored in 2019. And Candice, he was favored for a long time. So we see that continuity. I'll add another data point that just popped in my mind. Mr. Carney's speech speaking about an admiration of China's system. Who else said something like that? Justin Trudeau should be back in 2016, raise some eyebrows with his admiration of the basic, dictatorship of China and what they can achieve with that sense of government. And look, here's my final point. Who is benefiting from Canada going up against the United States? China is benefiting and Mark Carney is benefiting because the Liberal campaign is based upon really what is messages of anti-Americanism. And Candice, I'll be very refined in my answer. I think it's egregious that Canadians are facing tariffs, and yet I do think, unfortunately, Mexico and Canada are being used in a very sophisticated way by China to transship its products around the world, and that includes fentanyl precursors. So Washington and President Trump do have a deep state-level concern. Whether they've said a lot of things that frankly messed up our election, I think they did. But, back to your point, Canada and China fighting the U.S. in this global trade war, it looks horrible, and I think it is horrible.
Well, it feels like we are on the wrong side of this dispute. I wonder, though, Sam, so you see that your evidence and your research shows that there is deep interference, and yet the Hague report and the Hague inquiry sort of tried to brush it under the rug or downplay it. That's what it seemed like from my perspective. And then we had
Absolutely.
this report, this briefing earlier this week from Site, where they emphasized that it was both sides, that it was positive and negative, and yet you and your colleague found that there was no negative campaign against the Liberals. It was only positive. So my question is, how deep is this corruption, or how deep is the connection with China that even our own intelligence reports, even the people tasked with protecting Canada's institutions and exposing this kind of nefarious activities, that they have to equivocate and pretend that it's not as bad as it is, or pretend that it's coming from both sides when the evidence clearly shows that that is not the case? Should we be worried about our very agencies that are tasked with protecting Canadians and protecting our elections and our democracy?
Yeah, I'll answer very carefully. In short, what I do hear from highly connected officials and experts in America and Canada is that people of the greatest integrity in Canadian law enforcement and intelligence and their counterparts in the US have had some concerns about senior government figures in Canada meeting with known suspected Chinese threat actors of the type that are involved in organized crime, of the type that are involved in the money laundering, which the US government is concerned with, that moves, fentanyl, marijuana, human trafficking proceeds around the world. And sure, look, we've got, as some said, a baby step. Actually, I can say proudly, at least Canadians got disclosure this week that China at the highest level is targeting communities with disinformation that does favor, or if you take the government's view, target Mark Carney. But you're right. I and others that are very expert in this field say Canada's government and intelligence agencies at the bureaucratic level very certainly are watering down what their agencies know about the Liberals being favored. And you just have to be a smart reader and look at the data points to line up that very clearly China does favor Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney, and a lot of politicians around him. And, Candice, to your point, I mentioned, I broke the story of this Liberal candidate that stunned the world, saying suggesting his conservative rival could be turned over to the Toronto consulate. And, I don't need to tell you about that story, but what does it reveal? After the Hogue Commission says, not too much to see here, we're on top of it, here we have a candidate come out and shock the world, suggesting his rival can be turned over to the very consulate that I know is at the center of the Chinese police stations, is at the center of money laundering networks, is at the center of supporting certain candidates. And in the Ontario and Toronto area, people that are very expert on, reading Chinese media, looking at photographs, can see that the replacement of Paul Chien is very connected to the very same networks that are very friendly with the Chinese consulate and so-called community leaders with ties to Beijing and with ties, I'm alleging and asserting with confidence, unfortunately, ties to organized crime.
Well, it's so unbelievable that not just a Liberal candidate, right? This person was an elected member of Parliament. I'm talking about Paul Chiang. He was the MP from Markham Unionville from 2021. So he has been in office. He has been part of Justin Trudeau's Liberal caucus for the past 4 years, right? And it isn't until the middle of the election that it comes out that not only did he say this, originally, Sam, I thought that maybe he had made the comments in a Chinese interview, like a Chinese language interview in one of those papers, and that's why it didn't make the press. But actually, there's footage of it. He's saying it at a lectern, given a speech to a room full of people. It's on tape and it's in English. And he's saying, you're making the joke and the room is laughing, that we should adhere to this ridiculous Chinese warrant. There's a Chinese Communist government warrant out for the arrest of the Conservative candidate. And he's saying, turn them over to one of these Chinese police stations. Just absolutely a disgraceful comment, unbecoming of an elected official. The fact that Mark Carney stuck by the candidate, didn't fire him, said, he's apologized, let's move on. But I want to go on. So they replaced Paul Chung with a candidate that might be even more extreme, Peter Yuan. And you've done some research to expose his connections with a Chinese international school that has been connected to Chinese election interference. I mean, both of these individuals are police officers in Canada. I think this might be the most troubling part, that these are both Paul Chung and Peter Yang were police officers in Canada before getting into politics. And then, of course, there is this video of this new Liberal candidate singing My Chinese Heart, a communist propaganda song, wearing his full police regalia. So in Canadian uniform, making a complete mockery of our country, of our uniform, of our system, praising a Chinese communist regime in a propaganda song. Let's play a bit of that clip so that viewers remember what that looked like. I mean, when I see this kind of thing, I just feel like Canada is a fallen country, that it is just an absolute farce at this point. It's so frustrating to see that. Now, Sam, tell me, you've uncovered quite a bit about this individual. Why don't you let us know what you found?
Right. I mean, just watching the video, any viewer can see, okay, that's problematic, and they may question themselves. Okay, I'm a good Canadian. I believe in multiculturalism. I'll be careful to criticize. But for experts with intelligence agency level knowledge like myself, you look at that video and you know that the community association that hosts that gala event in 2017, along with the Chinese consul general who speaks to all the gathered politicians. I've reviewed the event. I've reviewed the consul general report. A number of the politicians alleged by CSIS to be involved in Greater Toronto election interference networks are there. This is what's called United Front community groups that work together with the Chinese Toronto consulate to interfere in Canada. And so this police officer, Mr. Yuan, who there's no evidence that he's done anything wrong, but he is standing on stage, Candice, with a person that is investigated by the RCMP in alleged Chinese police station activity in Toronto and Vancouver. And for, we don't need to name that person's name, but I've certainly done a lot of work on this community leader. Others have. People could go on a video and find this fellow shaking hands with Xi Jinping at a high-level United Front Work Department meeting in Beijing in 2019. All of this is known to the Canadian government, RCMP, CSIS. Of course, it's known to our American counterparts. And here we have this elite Toronto police officer singing a patriotic ode. And the key message of the ode, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but it talks about how even though an individual lives far from China, they are still connected, emotionally to China. And Candice, this is what China tries to instill in its United Front networks around the world. This is what interference and diaspora repression is about. And so I'll end my answer here. I believe there's so much more to know about that candidate and other current or former Canadian police officers. But by him joining the board of an international Chinese school whose students, it came up in Hague Commission testimony, could have been involved in, one of the riotings and being tasked or threatened by the Chinese consulate officials. What does it say? We're seeing all of them together, all the actors together in these stories that I uncovered, and the Globe and Mail follow my reporting. And what does it say? We have Mr. Carney now favored by China. Like, you just can't add up too many examples before people say, yeah, is our country under threat, especially in this election? I say yes.
Well, I just want to pick up on one thing you said, because you said you're a good Canadian and you believe in multiculturalism. This is the problem with official multiculturalism, and I'll explain the difference, right? Like for me, I love Canada, and I think part of what makes Canada a special and unique country is that it's always been a collection of people from different parts of the world. Like, being a Canadian doesn't mean you're any specific ethnicity or race, but it means that we've come together in a political association because we have shared values and shared beliefs. And I think that that is properly defined as pluralism, right? We all come together and we believe in one shared ideal of what it means to be Canadian. And then after that, you can practice whatever religion, you can practice whatever kind of, ethnic traditions that you have from different parts of the world. That's all well and good. It doesn't matter what you look like, what your race is, what your ethnicity is. What matters is your belief in the Canadian ideal. Under Justin Trudeau and their official multiculturalism, they say everybody's allowed in, and you don't have to change a thing about yourself. You can just come to Canada, continue living exactly how you lived in any other part of the world, bring your values, bring your traditions. Your values supersede our values. We don't even have any values in Canada. We don't even have any history or any tradition. The ones that we do are racist and genocidal. We're going to push that to a side, and we're going to build something new. And that has been an absolute adjunct failure. And you can see that here, where you have officials and people who are still clearly loyal to the communist Chinese government singing about their loyalty, saying that even though they're not in China, they still put China first. China is number one. Canada is way down the list. This has been a failure. This is what Canadians have to reject. We have to reject open immigration and immigration without any standards. We have to take our country back and say, yes, you can come to Canada. That's fine. But you have to commit to Canadian values. You have to put Canada first. You have to pledge an oath and swear allegiance to our country and to us. And the fact that Liberals won't do that, and they say it's actually racist to do that, and everything that I just said is unacceptable, and if you believe in those things, then you're not purely Canadian. This is the problem. This is part of the reason why, Sam, I believe this is the most important election of our lifetime, because Canadians have to reject that ideology of official multiculturalism, that Canada doesn't mean anything, and that everyone else gets to come first. I think that I would like to hear Conservatives talk more about this, but I think it's just so important that we move beyond this idea that everybody else comes before Canada. And I think it's important that, especially when you're selecting candidates to represent you in office, that those people show a demonstrated commitment to Canada first. That's not the case for the Liberals. And in fact, it seems that they purposefully recruit candidates that put other countries first. And in this case, it's China. I'll put the last word to you.
I mean, I agree with a lot of that. We've been, you could say, indoctrinated in our schooling to certain beliefs. Everyone remembers, America is a melting pot, Canada is a tossed salad. And it seemed, I didn't want to question it for a long time, and I wouldn't need to question it unless we found ourselves in this crisis point where indeed foreign countries have used that system. Foreign intelligence agencies, Candice, here's the point. At these Chinese police stations, the RCMP says, China is using funding from Heritage Canada and other entities to run, intelligence operations where they welcome Chinese migrants in and gather intelligence off them using Canadian funding. So it's just concrete evidence that what started as sort of a good-hearted honor system to open ourselves to the world, and most people play by the rules. Unfortunately, some of the worst and most dangerous networks in the world have taken advantage. And I do believe I would put blame on an elitist ideology that mostly is sitting in the Liberal Party that promote those sort of, social messaging ideals that many of these wealthy and powerful people in private don't even believe in themselves, but they are promoting those ideologies, and they get a lot of people not to question them because people are busy. They kind of trust that, the upper elites have everyone's best interests in mind. And I could go on, but I do think in different ways, others are realizing, I want to add this. Not to get personal, but within, my extended family, a lot of immigrants, and a lot of them, all of them want Canada to be stronger and more cohesive. And they say, look, you've lost your way. Where I'm from in my country would look at Canada and say, you're a broken nation. And essentially countries like China are running all over you. What are you doing?
Well, exactly. And I hope that Canadians are really starting to wake up to that. I don't know what more than in the middle of an election campaign, our own national security officials admitting that China is meddling in our election, and our prime minister just shrugging his shoulders saying, well, that's all I have to say about that. I don't know what's happening. Sam, thank you so much for joining the show. It's always so illuminating to have you on the show. Thank you for your research and the hard work that you put into uncovering all these files. And we appreciate your time today.
Great to talk.
All right, that is Sam Cooper. Go check out his Substack over at the Bureau. It is a must read to keep informed on what is happening in our country. That's all the time we have for today, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow with all the news. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is the Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you and God bless.